Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Overdrive Insider, where today we're diving into one of the most iconic intersections of motorcycle history and custom culture, Harley Knucklehead bobbers, and why these stripped-down machines continue to rule the streets long after their factory production ended. Picture it. The year is 1936. Harley-Davidson unveils its revolutionary Knucklehead engine, a V-twin design that not only gave riders more power, but also sparked an entire subculture of customization that still shapes the look and feel of motorcycles nearly a century later. From war veterans returning home with a thirst for individuality, to restless tinkerers taking hacksaws to their frames in the name of speed and simplicity, the Knucklehead bobber became more than a motorcycle. It became a rolling symbol of rebellion, freedom, and identity. In today's story, we're going to trace how that transformation unfolded, why it resonated so deeply with riders, and how its echoes still reverberate every time a vintage bobber rumbles past modern traffic. We'll start by unpacking how the Knucklehead engine itself created fertile ground for customization, and how bobbers emerged as a grassroots answer to both mechanical performance and cultural expression. Then we'll dig into the social currents that fueled the bobber's rise, from returning GIs with mechanical skills and a love of speed, to club culture and the ways stripped-down Harleys carved their own language of style across post-war America. Finally, we'll explore the ongoing legacy, why builders and riders in the 21st century still chase the look, the sound, and the attitude of a Knucklehead bobber, even when surrounded by fuel injection, ABS, and electronic gadgets. This isn't just nostalgia. It's a testament to how a machine built nearly 90 years ago still defines what cool looks like on two wheels. Over the course of this ride, we'll mix history with culture. We'll unpack some engineering without burying ourselves in jargon. And we'll see how the story of Knucklehead bobbers is really the story of people determined to make their machines reflect who they are. So settle in, because whether you're a seasoned rider or just fascinated by the way American iron-shaped global motorcycle culture, you're about to discover why these vintage customs never faded into museum pieces. They're alive, they're defiant, and they still command respect wherever they roll. Let's fire up this journey together right here on The Knucklehead engine didn't just mark a new era for Harley-Davidson. It lit the fuse for a movement that would reshape motorcycle culture. When riders first encountered the overhead valve design in the late 1930s, they weren't just meeting a machine with more power. They were seeing a platform that begged to be reimagined. That hunger to take something off the assembly line and make it one's own was a defining American impulse, and the Knucklehead gave people a perfect canvas. Early adopters stripped fenders, cut down seats, and simplified the bikes to chase performance and personality, establishing a look and ethos that came to be called the bobber. The rise of this style wasn't just mechanical, it was a declaration of independence. Micro-story. Imagine a young mechanic in 1941, recently out of high school, saving every paycheck to buy a Knucklehead. Within weeks, he's hacking at the rear fender, not because he wants to damage his brand new motorcycle, but because he wants it lighter, faster, different. That single act of removing steel is symbolic. It trims weight, sure, but it also trims away conformity. He rides into town on a machine that doesn't look like anyone else's. In the eyes of peers, he's no longer just another face in the crowd. He's the guy with the cut-down Harley, the one who dared to reinvent. This microcosm played out in garages across America, one torch cut at a time. Context digest. The 1930s and early 1940s were a time when motorcycles were still viewed as functional transportation for many Americans. But Harley's new engine invited the possibility of performance that rivaled cars. At a time when the average American family still owned one vehicle, a motorcycle wasn't a luxury, it was an affordable thrill. This context matters because it sets up why riders would take risks customizing. They were chasing individuality at a price point they could access. Micro-story. During World War II, thousands of servicemen became intimately familiar with Harley-Davidson's military bikes, particularly the WLA models. They learned how to repair them in rough conditions, improvising with limited parts. When they returned home, those skills translated directly into garage culture. They had the know-how, the tools, and the itch to transform. Many bought surplus Harleys cheap, swapping parts, experimenting with designs, and using the Knucklehead as the beating heart of a machine that blended wartime ingenuity with peacetime freedom. These weren't abstract ideas. They were lived experiences of veterans who wanted bikes as lean and aggressive as their memories of the battlefield. Reflection Bridge. Out of this convergence of mechanical possibility and cultural hunger, the Knucklehead bobber became the emblem of post-war restlessness. Context Digest. As returning soldiers brought their skills back home, they also imported a sense of camaraderie. Motorcycle clubs sprouted, not yet the sensationalized figures of media decades later, but brotherhoods built around shared machines. Within those groups, individuality mattered, but so did identity, and the stripped-down Harley spoke to both. The bobber wasn't only faster on city streets, it carried visual cues that set its rider apart in ways language couldn't. This was the beginning of motorcycles as cultural markers, rather than just transport. Micro-story. In a small California town in 1947, a group of riders arrive at a local meet. Most show up with stock bikes, shiny chrome intact, but one man pulls in with a Knucklehead bobber. Fenders shaved, bars narrower, pipes loud and raw. Heads turn. By the end of the day, he's the center of attention, not because he's the fastest or wealthiest, but because his bike breaks the mold. Within weeks, others in the club start chopping their own machines, and suddenly the look spreads like wildfire. One bold move, one customized Harley, triggers a wave of imitation that shapes the aesthetic of an entire scene. Reflection bridge. With every fender removed and every pipe rerouted, the bobber became more than a trend. It became shorthand for rebellion, individuality, and freedom. Context Digest. By the early 1950s, the bobber had moved from fringe to fixture. Popular culture was beginning to catch on, with movies and magazines featuring these stripped-down Harleys as icons of cool. The influence wasn't confined to America either. Servicemen stationed abroad brought the look back to Europe and beyond, seeding a global fascination with American custom culture. What started as garage improvisation was evolving into a worldwide design language, proving that the Knucklehead bobber was more than a passing fad. Micro-story. Picture a father in the Midwest, working long hours at the factory, coming home to his garage where a half-finished Knucklehead bobber waits. He's not chasing glory. He's chasing a sense of identity in a post-war world that often demanded conformity. His kids watch him strip parts and weld pieces late into the night, and for them, the machine becomes a symbol of self-reliance. Decades later, those kids remember not just the bike, but what it stood for. The power to take something mass-produced and turn it into a personal statement. In that way, the bobber tradition passed quietly through generations, not just through magazines or clubs, but through family garages. As these stories ripple together, the Knucklehead bobber is no longer just a modified Harley. It's a social engine that fueled rebellion, camaraderie, and creativity, and its influence was about to deepen in ways few could have predicted, setting the stage for its entrenchment as a permanent symbol of American motorcycle culture. As the bobber style gained traction across post-war America, the cultural weight it carried grew heavier, shaping not just how motorcycles looked, but how riders were perceived. Stripped-down knuckleheads weren't just personal projects anymore, they were becoming shorthand for a counterculture. In a nation where conformity dominated workplaces, suburbs, and social expectations, the bobber roared like an unspoken protest. By the late 1950s and into the 1960s, that protest found itself magnified by youth movements, media portrayals, and the growing mythology around motorcycle clubs. The Knucklehead bobber was no longer a niche creation. It was an icon. Micro-story. A rider in Los Angeles finishes building his Knucklehead bobber, complete with a solo seat and shortened exhaust pipes. He rides down Sunset Boulevard where teenagers in diners and moviegoers on the sidewalks stare as if a celebrity just passed. To them, the machine embodies everything thrilling and dangerous about rebellion, and soon the look becomes aspirational. Riders across the city begin chopping down their own Harleys, and magazines publish spreads celebrating this raw style. What started as a personal experiment is now a social contagion, shaping how outsiders and insiders alike define cool. Context Digest. The American media of the 1960s played a pivotal role in cementing the bobber's image. Films like The Wild One and countless pulp magazines portrayed stripped-down bikes as extensions of a rebel lifestyle. While not every rider identified with the outlaw image, the association stuck, and for better or worse, bobbers became symbols of non-conformity. The Knucklehead engine, with its distinct look and sound, made these bikes immediately recognizable, further reinforcing their cultural punch. Micro-story. In the Midwest, a small-town police officer pulls over a young man on a knucklehead bobber. The reason isn't speeding, it's suspicion. The bike itself looks menacing compared to stock models, stripped bare and throbbing with sound. To the local community, the rider suddenly seems dangerous simply because of the machine he rides. This tension illustrates how the bobber's visual language created assumptions, fueling the divide between mainstream America and the riders who chose these stripped-down Harleys. Reflection bridge. That stigma only added fuel to the fire, making the bobber even more appealing to those seeking an alternative identity. Context digest. As motorcycle clubs expanded, the bobber became a foundational element of group identity. While some clubs leaned into the outlaw mythology, many were simply tight-knit brotherhoods whose members customized Harleys as part of their communal fabric. The Knucklehead engine, already legendary for its reliability and torque, became a unifying symbol, and the bobber style gave clubs a visual shorthand. Pared-down bikes that reflected pared-down rules, freedom from the excess of mainstream society. Micro-story. In Northern California, a returning Vietnam veteran finds solace in a local motorcycle club. His knucklehead bobber, built from surplus parts and long nights in the garage, becomes both therapy and badge of belonging. Riding alongside others with similar machines, he feels a sense of camaraderie he hasn't felt since the military. The bike isn't just a machine, it's a lifeline, a way to navigate the turbulence of reintegration into civilian life. His story mirrors countless others who found meaning in customization, proving that these machines carried emotional as well as mechanical weight. Reflection bridge. What began as simple modifications for speed and style had evolved into a cultural phenomenon, with bobbers serving as both lightning rods for judgment and symbols of belonging. Context digest. By the 1970s, motorcycle customizing had splintered into multiple directions, with choppers gaining prominence thanks to extended forks and radical designs. Yet even in the shadow of the flamboyant chopper, the bobber retained a purity. Builders respected it for its honesty. Less was more, and the knucklehead engine's muscular presence did most of the talking. In many ways, the bobber was the foundation on which later custom trends stood, a reminder of where it all began. Microstory. A young custom builder in the 1970s opens his first workshop. While many clients ask for long-forked choppers, a select group quietly insists on bobbers. These clients want their machines simple, aggressive, and rooted in tradition. The builder notices that every time a bobber leaves his shop, it garners more attention on the street than the flashier choppers. Over time, he realizes that while trends shift, the stripped-down knucklehead never loses its mystique. Its timeless appeal gives him steady business, proving that authenticity can outlast flash. As decades turned, the bobber remained resilient, refusing to vanish even when other styles rose and fell. That endurance carried the knucklehead bobber into modern times, where its role would transform yet again, no longer just a symbol of rebellion or brotherhood, but a touchstone of authenticity in a world overflowing with mass production. In today's motorcycle landscape, surrounded by high-tech machines with digital dashboards, fuel injection, and electronic rider aids, the knucklehead bobber stands out not as an antique, but as a declaration. Its stripped-down profile and raw mechanical soul remind riders of what it means to connect directly with the machine. The survival of this style into the 21st century proves that some designs never lose their relevance. Instead, they grow stronger as the world around them changes. To ride a knucklehead bobber today is to choose experience over convenience, authenticity over conformity. Microstory. A modern builder in Brooklyn spends months restoring a battered knucklehead engine, salvaging it from a pile of forgotten parts. He crafts a minimalist bobber around it. No digital gauges, no unnecessary chrome, just raw steel and mechanical honesty. When he finally rides it through the city, heads turn not because of flash, but because of presence. People who know nothing about motorcycles recognize that it's different. They sense the history in its proportions, the rebellion in its stance. For the rider, it's not just transportation. It's a conversation with the past that plays out on every street corner. Context digest. The rise of social media and custom culture coverage has given the knucklehead bobber a second life. Builders around the world showcase their projects online, and vintage Harley customs routinely win awards at shows. Younger generations far removed from the 1940s or 1950s discover these machines digitally before ever seeing one in person. Yet when they do, the impact is profound. The bobber looks timeless, as if its simplicity was always the right answer. Micro-story. A 20-something rider in Tokyo finds inspiration scrolling through photos of American bobbers. Determined to build his own, he scours local swap meets until he secures a knucklehead motor. His build is a fusion of Japanese craftsmanship and American tradition, blending cultures while keeping the bike lean and purposeful. When he rides it through narrow city streets, onlookers see something that feels simultaneously foreign and familiar. The bobber has transcended geography, becoming a global design language that speaks to individuality across borders. Reflection bridge. What began as rebellion in American garages has become a worldwide pursuit of authenticity. Context digest. The collector market also reinforces the knucklehead bobber's enduring appeal. Original knucklehead engines fetch staggering prices, and custom-built bobbers with period-correct details can command six figures at auction. Yet the market isn't just about money, it's about preservation. Owners see themselves as caretakers of history, ensuring that these machines don't disappear into scrap heaps but continue to inspire future generations. In this sense, every knucklehead bobber restored today is part of a broader cultural memory. Micro-story. A father and daughter in Arizona take on a restoration project together. The father, who once rode a bobber in his youth, guides his daughter through the process of stripping, cleaning, and rebuilding the knucklehead. For her, it's not just about learning mechanics. It's about bonding with family and heritage. When they finally roll the finished bike out of the garage, it represents decades of tradition passed down through grease-stained hands. That machine becomes a bridge across generations, proving that the bobber is as much about people as it is about parts. Reflection bridge. Each modern story adds to the tapestry, proving that the knucklehead bobber isn't a relic, but a living tradition. Context digest. In a culture dominated by mass production and disposable goods, the knucklehead bobber endures as a counterpoint. Its stripped form and unmistakable sound embody permanence and individuality in an age of uniformity. This explains why riders continue to gravitate toward these machines, not for convenience, not for practicality, but for meaning. The bobber represents the courage to say no to excess, yes to character. Micro-story. At a modern bike rally, surrounded by rows of gleaming factory customs loaded with electronics, one knucklehead bobber rolls in. Despite lacking polish or modern tech, it draws the biggest crowd. Riders and non-riders alike gather around, captivated by its simplicity. For many, it's their first time seeing a machine that raw, that honest. As cameras click and stories are shared, the bobber reaffirms its role not as a museum piece, but as a touchstone of authenticity in the present day. The story of Harley Knucklehead bobbers closes its circle here, where past and present meet. What started as a handful of riders cutting down their bikes in the 1930s has become an enduring legacy, preserved through generations of builders, riders, and dreamers. The bobber still rules not because it is frozen in time, but because it adapts by staying true to itself, lean, rebellious, and unapologetically individual. And as long as people seek to express themselves through two wheels, the stripped-down knucklehead will continue to claim its place on the streets, timeless in a world that never stops changing. What we've traced is more than just the history of a motorcycle. It's the journey of an idea. The knucklehead bobber began as a simple act of defiance, riders cutting away the excess to chase speed and individuality. Over time, that defiance grew into a cultural wave, reshaping how America and the world viewed motorcycles. Along the way, these stripped-down Harleys carried the weight of rebellion, brotherhood, and authenticity, never losing their edge even as decades rolled past. Today, the sight of a knucklehead bobber still sparks fascination, not because it's old, but because it's timeless. Its stripped-down design has outlasted trends, its sound continues to stir the soul, and its stance speaks a language that doesn't need words. Whether roaring down a highway or resting on a street corner, the bobber makes a statement. Individuality matters, and authenticity never goes out of style. This enduring spirit is why collectors pay fortunes, why builders dedicate years to perfecting their projects, and why younger riders keep rediscovering a machine nearly 90 years after its debut. In an era of mass production and fleeting digital trends, the knucklehead bobber remains steady, steel, grease, and character forged into rolling art. For enthusiasts, it's a reminder that the most powerful machines aren't always the most advanced. Sometimes they're the ones that strip away everything unnecessary and leave only what's essential. And so the bobber continues to rule the streets, not as a relic of the past, but as proof that simplicity, courage, and creativity can stand the test of time. Thanks for riding with us on Overdrive Insider. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.